So I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of a little nervous about talking, which is funny because I'm talking about talking. Um, but so my presentation, I don't know if you missed what Mr. Bowen said, but hi, I'm Precious. I'm currently a junior here at Magnet, and my presentation is on a new way to think and exploring the phenomenon of receptive bilingualism and kind of going to depth into what bilingualism is, what it means to speak a language, what it means to correspond using a language, and why exactly we use language and its purposes. And if you see any spelling errors, you didn't, because PowerPoint hates when I try to be artsy. Okay, so for some background, I don't know if my last name might spoiled it, but I'm Nigerian, and so even though me and my brother we were both born here in the States, both my parents are Nigerian immigrants. And so when they came to America to come here and raise me and my brother, they brought with them their food and their culture and their experiences and their language. And for me, language has always been a very important part of my family because my mom, primarily, she is fluent in both languages that she speaks, Yoruba and English, but she prefers to speak in our home native of Yoruba. And this is my amazing mommy. She's amazing. She can be a little vicious, but don't let her sweetness fool you. But my mom is probably the smartest person I know. Like she is so incredible. She is so diligent. She's so intelligent and so hardworking. But when I was younger, she would often work as a night shift nurse at Grady, and she would often come home and tell me about all the subtle racism and microaggressions that she would face, not only just being black, but also because of the way she talked. She would often tell me how she felt like she couldn't communicate with her coworkers. She couldn't properly provide enough care to her patients, and how she felt like that created a disconnect and she wasn't able to fully communicate with her patients and fully get her ideas out there. And so my mom is bilingual, and I consider myself bilingual. I consider my entire family bilingual. But when it comes to me, I kind of consider it with a caveat because even though I say I'm bilingual, I actually don't speak my second language. I would say that I speak English all the time. But whenever I do use Yoruba, I never speak it. I can understand it. Oftentimes, I call my mom once every single day whenever I'm here at school, and she'll be talking Yoruba, and I'll respond to her back in English. There's no lags in the conversation, but she just speaks in her language, I speak in my language, and we're able to communicate. Sure, it might seem as if it's going through a different channel, but we're still able to express how we feel, how our days are going, checking up on each other, that so forth. And so I kind of wanted to do this talk because whenever like I tell people like, oh, like just like when you meet people like, oh yeah, I'm like technically bilingual, and they're like, oh yeah, like what do you speak? Like French, Spanish, and I'm like, no, I said because nobody knows what Yoruba is first off, and then they're like, oh, can you say something for me? And then I just run blank. So and that's always been kind of frustrating with me because even though I live here in the States and I've been born and I've been raised, I still like keeping my culture a part of me. And it's always been kind of, I want to say disheartening to kind of feel like I haven't been attached to such a key part of my culture. So when I was coming up with the idea of this TED Talk, I really wanted to focus in on what it means to be bilingual. Because to me, language is important. It's how I communicate with my grandparents. They only speak Yoruba back at home. And so a lot of times when I was younger, I would never be able to talk to my grandparents because I simply couldn't express myself to them, and they can express myself, and they can express themselves to me. So if we want to get technical, what exactly is bilingualism? Most people they view bilingualism as very, I want to say rigid. So kind of you have to speak, read, and write in both languages. You have to, you have to, you have to. And so that's not really the case. So if you're going off like purely a dictionary definition, Merriam-Webster kind of defines bilingualism in two main ways. So obviously it's the preconceived notion like, oh, the ability to speak two languages. But then they also define it in another way, which is the frequent use of two languages. And that second point was really interesting to me when I was doing research for this talk. Because what does it mean to use a language? Because when you really sit down and think about it, language is not just words, it can be nonverbal. Simple things just as shrugging your shoulders or nodding your head or just giving a high five. Those are all valid forms of communication, but they're not verbal. So if we can recognize that as a valid way of communication, then how can we see other ways to use different languages and use their different words? And so I have kind of four main ideas that I kind of want to go over with you. And so my first one is that you don't have to speak a language or necessarily the words of the language to utilize it. And that's like going back to physical body language, like shrugging your shoulders. It means like you don't really care. Like you don't have to use the words of the language as long as you guys have come to a mutual understanding and a mutual compromise of how you're going to communicate in order to best express yourselves. And so how do bilinguals specifically use language? And so when it comes to bilingualism, I kind of want you to think of bilingualism not as something rigid, but as a scale, something that can fluctuate as time progresses. And I kind of have a little idea that might help you see it better, and I call it the broad bilingualism spectrum. And so we have two ends. And so on this end, on like kind of like the far left, is passive bilingual, and where you are aware of the two languages, but you necessarily only speak one. So like I would consider myself kind of more on the passive bilingual side. And then active bilingualism is on the other end, where you're able to not only understand the two languages, but also speak, write, and read in both of them. And then receptive bilingual is that huge space that fills up the gap and allows you to fluctuate. Like for example, I said earlier that me and my brother have been raised in the States. My brother actually lived in Nigeria for 2 years. So he's technically more in depth with the culture. He had to use it more on a day-to-day life. So even though we come from the exact same parents and the exact same culture and the exact same household, our experiences are different. But me and my brother, we communicate all the time. So language isn't the only way to be able to communicate and express your ideas. And so, like I just said, language is not about speaking the two languages. It's about communicating with the help of the two languages and seeing the fact that you know two or more languages as a help and not hindrance. And the United States is actually rare in that fact, as Pew's research has actually come forward and said that most of the world, like about 60% of the world, is bilingual. The United States is actually very rare in the fact where almost everyone here is monolingual. And so, because at the end of the day, the purpose of language is expression, being able to express your ideas and your feelings and your thoughts to people and being able to make sure that you are feeling heard and expressed. And going back to my mom, she often felt like she wasn't being heard and expressed. And she would often tell me like, oh, Precious, like I just don't know what to do. Like I feel like I have all these different great ideas, but I just don't know how to express them. And that just always surprised me because she did have all these great ideas. She just didn't feel like she had a space to express them as freely as she could. And so people communicate best in the method or the way that they know best. And so when it comes to communicate with people from different cultures, as we'll all do when we go to like different jobs and different careers and different fields, you have to find a way to sort of adapt to how people communicate, whether it is through language or whether it's through how they work, how they lead, how they do certain tasks, whether they're organized or more go with the flow. It all kind of depends. And so going back to the receptive bilingual scale, this idea of mine, it's not rigid. Like I would say maybe me personally, I'm kind of like right here, but that doesn't mean that I can't somehow progress over here over time. As long as you're willing to have an open mind and learn and being able to accept different cultures and different ideas, then you should be willing to grow. And so my last idea that I want to leave with you is that language breeds creativity through connection. The entire point of language and expression and talking and all the things that we've talked about today is that you're just trying to be yourself and you're trying to express yourself because your feelings are valid, your thoughts are valid. And just being able to feel like, even if if you speak English and I speak French, like even if we might not exactly communicate the same, we can still learn from each other and we can still build upon of each other. And yeah, thank you.